Hello, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk. Sales and Enablement Strategies, sponsored by Allego, Axiom Sales Kinetics, ELB Learning, and WhatFix. I'm Dee Caraglino, event producer and your host for the day. Before we dive into our first session, I'd like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's sessions. Throughout today's event, please feel free to chat comments into the chat window and submit your questions in the Q&A window. I'll be monitoring your comments and saving your questions for the Q&A session or Q&A toward the end of each session. I've enabled closed captions for this event, and you may select to turn them on or off by locating the closed caption icon in your toolbar. I encourage you to share the information you received today via social media by following our handle at Training Industry, that is Training Industry without the Y. We'll be engaging in the Twitter conversation throughout the event, so please feel free to join in there. At the end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey pop up in your browser. We'd appreciate your thoughts on today's event. Lastly, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the on-demand sessions after the event. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you, and if it isn't, welcome back. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. Make Training Industry your go-to resource for learning solutions. Visit trainingindustry.com to learn more. Now, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker, Bob Sanders. Bob is a proud sales professional. For more than 30 years, he has had the honor of helping salespeople experience better sales results and more professional fulfillment than they ever imagined. Bob is currently managing partner of Axiom and previously served in this role from 2009 until 2018, acquiring the company with several partners in May of 2022. Prior to this, Bob was Chief Operating Officer of Reflect Systems, a leader in digital signage and digital out-of-home ad technology, which was sold to CRI in February of 2022. Bob is an avid cyclist and lives in Dallas with his wife of 38 years, Donna. Bob, are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Dee.
All right.
I will share my screen. And as Dee just mentioned, I live in Dallas with my wife of 38 years, and I'm going to enlist everybody's support in helping me to continue to stay married to my wife. I've got my coffee cup here, and unfortunately, I have a little tendency to slurp my coffee. So we don't want that today. So if you happen to hear me slurp, please be sure to say or raise your thumbs down, and that'll remind me not to do that. And I know it's irritating to all of you too. I'm going to try to share my screen here, but may have a little issue with that. So let me see if I can get the right screen share going here. It's not showing me the thing that it showed me before. Let's try to do it again. Sorry, folks, for that technical difficulty. Normally not a problem.
Bob, I can share your slides if you're having trouble.
It looks like it's going to stop you. Did you already stop sharing first, Dee? Because it's giving me an error that says I have to stop you first. There we go. I think that'll do it. All right, now we should be good. All good? Everybody sees that?
Yep, you're all set.
Excellent, and away we go. So welcome everybody again. So great to be with you today and very excited to be kicking off the day for you. And it really is an appropriate way to start the day for all of you, because our objective during this session is actually to help ensure that all the other sessions where you learn about sales enablement tools that may be really helpful in your business are effective. So our objective here is to help maximize the impact of any sales enablement initiative that you may be undertaking. And to cover that, we're going to actually have 6 topics today. First, we're going to talk about why coaching matters, as you could tell from the title. This relates to transforming managers into coaches. We're going to talk about why that's such a critical part of sales enablement success. We're going to talk about why it doesn't happen, when it doesn't happen. We're going to talk about the difference between coaching and feedback, a model that you can apply to your business for effective coaching, and some specific ideas about things that you can do as sales enablement professionals, learning and development professionals, to actually enable more effective coaching inside the organization. And we'll be sure to leave enough time for Q&A. As Dee mentioned, you can put the questions in anytime you want, and she'll help us get through them when we get to the end. So let's dive into why it is that coaching matters. And I'm going to start with my preferred definition. I know there are lots of different ways to interpret what sales enablement really means. This one happens to resonate with me. You may have one that's a little different than this, but sales enablement is really the process providing the sales organization with the information, the content, and the tools that they need in order to help salespeople do their jobs more effectively. So what I want to start with today is actually a poll question. And with that in mind and understanding that the entire theme today is sales enablement, the question is, what sales enablement initiatives are you planning? And you can answer as many different ones here as apply to you. We're going to leave this up for a second. This will help ensure that I make my comments, what I share today, as meaningful for you, given the specific things that you've got planned. And this is in the next 12 to 24 months. It doesn't have to be immediate, but let us know some of the things that you're planning from a sales enablement perspective. We'll give you a minute to complete that. And Dee, you let us know when you're ready to share those results. And I'll take my first pass at sipping coffee without slurping it into all of your ears.
Hopefully the software will mute that.
Right, that's why I invested in noise canceling headphones.
Okay.
I should wear them around the house.
Okay, so it looks like we've had a pretty good response. I'm going to go ahead and close it out for you.
Awesome. And you'll throw the results up there. So excellent, got a good cross section. We got some sales methodology things. So it looks like our leader is sales methodology. 65% of you are planning on doing that. Second most is content management and delivery, followed closely by CRM. So we've got a good cross section of initiatives planned. And what we're going to talk about again are things that you can do to help ensure that any initiative is successful. And to do that, I want to talk for a minute about the underlying objective for all of those sales enablement initiatives. I mean, when you think about whether it's CRM, it's a content management tool, it's selling methodologies, when you think about the underlying reason, the objective for implementing a sales enablement initiative, isn't it really to affect a change in behavior? I mean, if it's methodology, we want people to become more skilled at qualifying. We want them to become more effective at presenting. If it's content, we want them to use the most effective content at the appropriate spot in their customer interactions. With CRM, we want them to capture the right information. We want them to forecast more accurately, right? When you think about sales enablement initiatives, almost all of them are really change initiatives. And so in order to understand what we can do, how we can leverage management to help those initiatives be as effective as possible, it's really helpful to look at a simple change model. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but focus on the wheel, if you will. And this is sort of how change happens. And what happens when we affect change in an organization isn't so much that it just happens for the organization. It's what happens when individual people believe that the change is going to benefit them. They then commit themselves to doing the things necessary in order to make the change happen. And it in turn affects their behaviors. Their behaviors produce a better result, which helps to reinforce and fuel the belief, right? And when you think about it, some of the stuff we can do kind of programmatically, like we can get people on board with change initiatives, with sales enablement projects, programmatically. We can bring them in a room, we can build a burning platform for them so they understand why it's so necessary. We can provide tools and training to get them to understand what their role is in the change. Now, here's the thing that we've learned though. Without effective coaching, it all kind of just dies. And I'm going to give you a couple of specific examples of this because we've seen over 30 years in this business that coaching is the pivot point for change. The sales managers are the pivot point for change in your organization, and they can make all the difference between success and failure. I'm going to give you one example on the screen and I'll talk about another one. This is actually a nationwide technology company. I think at the time they had 12 to 15 offices. And as we looked at what they were doing, we found that there were a few offices that had very strong, consistent coaching in place. And it was very programmatic, it was systematic, it was very consistent, right? And in those offices, they only had 20% turnover. But in the other offices where coaching wasn't happening, they had 60%. More than half of the sales force was turning over every year. And it's no wonder, because the offices where coaching was happening, every person in the office was making quota. In the other offices, only half of them were making quota. This is also a technology where switching to their business required an upfront fee. And at the time, the offices where no coaching was happening were waiving the fees. Universally, pretty much every single opportunity, the fees were waived. But in the office where coaching was happening, in those offices, they were collecting the fees. And in one particular office, they were collecting $100,000 a month in fees that other offices were just waiving. And it just helped propel them to profitability more quickly. What they implemented was the same company-wide. There's another example where two different organizations implemented the exact same training program, taught by the same instructors, the same models, right? One organization had 4 times better results than the other because their people were coaching consistently. So what we gleaned from that, and this has been across, again, 30 years with dozens and dozens of clients, and not just our clients, but people that we've worked with and helped and watched as they've implemented other sales enablement initiatives like CRM, like content management. The difference between success and failure of the initiatives many times doesn't boil down to the technology. It doesn't boil down to the change management overall. It boils down to the degree to which managers are engaging as coaches. And so what we're going to talk about next is why it is that there would be a disparity when the data is pretty clear. And by the way, data isn't just coming from me. You can go find studies from organizations like Aberdeen. There's stuff that training industries published in the past about this too, about the impact of sales coaching on sales effectiveness and the success of sales enablement initiatives. There's tons of data to support this. So much so that it makes you wonder, why would it break down? Why wouldn't everybody, knowing the impact that effective coaching can have on the success of their initiative, why wouldn't everybody always have effective coaching? When fact of the matter is that most want to, pretty common, but many aren't doing it successfully. And really what we've identified is 4 obstacles that consistently get in the way. The first one is who it is that we're putting into sales management positions. And some of you can relate to this. You've seen this happen in your own organizations. We take our top sellers and we move them into sales management positions. And it seems rational until you do it. And the thing is, selling and coaching are vastly different jobs. They're not the same activities. And what happens when we promote those people, if they don't have the right coaching mentality, if they don't have the right coaching model, what happens is they revert to being super sellers, and their team is essentially scheduling meetings for them, and they're going in and trying to sell those. And so we don't really develop the players, the talent on the team. It may have a positive impact on revenue in the short term, but it's hard to scale that. The other thing that's interesting about coaching is, and 2 and 3 are very closely related here, most managers actually think they're really good at it. In fact, this has been a while back, but we did, with an organization, we did a study, and we actually asked sales managers to rate their own coaching effectiveness. And somewhere around 75% rated themselves as good or very good coaches. We also asked their direct reports to rate them as coaches, and somewhere around 50% said they were good or very good coaches. So there's a big drop there. But when we compared their behavior to an actual coaching model, the numbers dropped even further. And that gets to the third point. For many organizations, there's no clarity around what good coaching looks like. And in fact, there's no measurement or accountability for it either. So what we're doing is we're promoting people who are great sellers. We're making the primary focus producing numbers. We're not showing them a model for coaching, and we're not measuring the degree to which they're doing it at all, in many cases, let alone doing it effectively. And so what would they naturally do? They would revert to spending their time selling. And that's what happens. And it can be a huge challenge as we work to implement sales enablement initiatives that ultimately depend on affecting a change in behavior in order to deliver the business outcomes that we're after in the first place. So, good news is the fact that it is a struggle for so many organizations means it's a tremendous opportunity for everyone on this call. We have an opportunity to create sustainable competitive advantage by building an effective coaching culture, an effective coaching model inside the organizations, and it can help to accelerate adoption, proficiency, the breadth of impact for nearly every sales enablement initiative that we've got. But in order for that to happen, we got to break down one more sort of myth about what effective coaching looks like. And then we'll get into the model for coaching. And that is the difference between feedback and coaching. And there is a pretty distinct difference. And more often than not, what you'll find is some of the things that we're actually teaching managers to do that we're calling coaching models actually are feedback models. And by the way, don't get me wrong, they're not bad feedback models. In fact, they do help to create better conversations between managers and sellers, but they don't necessarily qualify as actual coaching. And to help illustrate this point, we're going to use a tool called the performance pyramid. And really, all of this is a visual representation of how results are produced in a sales organization. And so at the top of the pyramid is the result, the sales that we want, the margins that we want, the new customer acquisition that we want, the retention that we want, right? Those are all the business outcomes that we're after. As you can imagine, the business outcomes are produced, are the byproduct of the behaviors the sales team engages in. Now, I'm going to take a step to the side for just a minute here and make a disclaimer. The environment does matter, right? So the economy matters, the competition matters, the product that they've got, the pricing that they got, all those things matter. But what's interesting, and we've had the opportunity, as I've said, to work with dozens of organizations where the same salespeople sell the same products in the same markets across a spectrum. And you'll find that in even a bad economy, even in companies where they are at a competitive disadvantage, there is a difference in sales performance. Some people are succeeding at a much higher level than other people. And it's because they are engaging in more effective selling behaviors. They're executing more effectively in the environment that they're in. So even though environmental factors can absolutely play a role in what we produce, the thing that we want to focus on is the selling behaviors that deliver the best results in whatever environment we're in. Now, next thing to understand is those behaviors are enabled by the skill and knowledge of the salespeople. In other words, these are players on the team. Their ability to execute the game plan, to go into the market, to have the conversations, acquire the accounts is really dependent on them having the skill and knowledge to do that. So what does that mean? That means the skill to qualify opportunities, the skill to present our solutions in a compelling fashion, the knowledge to understand what differentiates us from the competition, the knowledge about the customer to understand what good questions are and how to ascertain more meaningful information about their business. That's skill and knowledge, right? Now, that rests on a certain foundation. One is their commitment to doing the work. And it's not just their commitment to putting in the time, it's their commitment to developing their skills. And the thing about commitment is it can ebb and flow a little bit, right? We can do things, and you've probably all seen this in the past. We might do something that really helps encourage a higher level of commitment and enthusiasm for our programs and our solutions, like a new compensation plan or a new product that answers a particular need or solves a particular problem in the marketplace, right? Then all of a sudden you see enthusiasm and commitment grow. On the other hand, we can do things that diminish enthusiasm too, like beating people up in a bad market where they're already struggling to compete. And then ultimately, all of that is built on the foundation of what we call an Axiom capacity. And think of that as their innate talents. That's who they are. And the thing is, you've really got to hire that. You can't make people more intelligent, right? Native intelligence is a part of it. You can't necessarily change their communication style. You can't give them empathy. So you want to hire for the first and second level, you can develop the others. Now, the thing is, as you actually listen to coaching conversations between a sales manager and a seller, here's what you'll find in many cases. the conversation is feedback in that it really focuses only on the top two levels of the pyramid. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples of this. So we've got a salesperson and the person isn't achieving their objective. So as a sales manager, I sit down with them in my one-on-one and I say, hey, you're really not on your number. You've got to do better. Well, clearly that's focused on results. And the person probably already knows that. So managers don't do that one all that often, but they will do this. They'll say, you've got to focus on your results. Now, I've really taken some time to analyze your numbers. And the reason you're not doing as well as you need to is your closing ratio is too low. We got to bring that up. What have you thought of? What can you do to bring that up? And if you think about that from the seller's perspective for a moment, it almost doesn't make any sense. You'd be looking at the manager saying, well, if I knew how to do that, I would already be doing it, right? Or maybe they'll actually go down one level and they'll say, hey, the reason your closing ratio is too low is you're not qualifying well enough. You need to qualify better. You need to execute the behaviors better. And again, if the person knew how to execute the behaviors better, they probably would be doing that. The reason there's a gap in their result is that there's a gap in their behaviors. And the reason there's a gap in their behaviors is either there is a or several gaps in their skill and knowledge, and or they're not committed to doing it that way, or they don't have the capacity. And the only way to know which it is if the conversation actually covers the full spectrum of the performance pyramid. If coaching conversations really happen, and that's the difference between feedback and coaching. Feedback really just focuses on the top two levels. You're not producing the result you need to, do better. You're not executing the behaviors, do better. Coaching conversations really explore the root cause, and they dive into all levels of the pyramid in order to make meaningful recommendations. So what does that actually look like? I'm going to cover that in just a moment. And we're going to talk about a 5-step model for effective coaching. But one of the things I wanted to do before we dive into that is I want to try to pull the veil away a little bit and take the mystery out of this. We did not invent effective coaching. We gave it a good name. You'll see that in a minute, because what does a company do if they're in the training space but come up with acronyms, right? So we've got a cool little acronym that helps. But the reason we didn't is because we didn't have to. In fact, nearly everybody on this call has probably at one point or another already experienced coaching that is completely aligned with the model that we're going to cover. And in order to point that out, we've got our second poll question. So Dee, if you'll put the questions on the screen, what we want to know is, which of these things have you participated in the past? Golf lessons, piano lessons, tennis lessons, maybe some other musical instrument. You played team sports, you've had a personal trainer. Which of these things have you actually been involved with in the past? I'll give you once again a moment so everybody can get to that and put your answers in. And it's another opportunity for me to sip my coffee without slurping. Actually getting pretty good at this. All right, here we go. So good cross section. Looks like the number one thing was a personal trainer. That's awesome. Some team sports. Also, we've got some musicians in the audience, golf and tennis. Okay, excellent. So here's the thing. If you've ever done any of these things, it is likely that you have experienced coaching that aligns with the GUIDE coaching model. So what does GUIDE stand for? The G is for goal setting. And we're going to cover each of these in a little bit more detail. So we'll go through all of them first, and then I'll dive into each in a little more detail. Second is uncovering gaps. The I is for identifying the root cause. In other words, the underlying reason for the gap. The D is for defining the corrective action or learning activities that will help shrink the gap. And then the E is to evaluate the impact or performance afterwards. So we're going to dive into each of these one at a time. And as we do, I want to also talk just for a moment about the most common, concern that we get from sales managers when we introduce them to coaching using the GUIDE model. And the most common concern we hear far and away, there's really no second place that's even close, is I don't have time to coach. They're asking me to do too many things. So one of the things we do, for example, when we're doing sessions with managers, is we actually have them list out the things they spend their time on. And what you'll find is the 5 items that are on the screen now are always on the list. In other words, they always spend some of their time planning for how they're going to achieve their number. They always are reviewing the pipeline or performance metrics with their team, almost always reviewing opportunities. The only time we see them not reviewing opportunities is when the sales cycle is so short, in which case it's replaced with joint calls or call reviews, recorded call reviews. And in an environment where they have long-term relationships with accounts and they're building account plans, they do account reviews. So the interesting thing is, managers that we meet with are already spending time doing the right things. Yes, they have other demands on their time. Yes, there are administrative requirements, and there may be other HR issues, and there are customer issues that they need to participate in or take care of themselves. Those are all things that really matter, right? But they are almost always engaging in these activities with the right frequency and spending enough time already on them in order for them to be converted from feedback sessions to coaching sessions. They just need to approach it a little differently. And so that's what we're going to talk about as we dive into each one of these things one at a time. And as we do, I got a couple of pictures here. I think I got at least one of an actual coach. And who you see on the screen right now is Pat Summit. And I don't know if any of you know her. If we had more time, I'd do a little poll to see who knows her. I know at least one person is from Tennessee, and he knows who she is. So Pat Summit is a coaching legend. She was the Tennessee women's basketball coach. I believe she is still the winningest coach, all coaches, in NCAA history. And she had a really great quote that's applicable to goal setting conversations. Her quote was, "They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And here's the problem with how we plan for sales success. The plan tends to flow from the top down. We determine what number we need from an organization. We divide that up in the way that we think is equitable among the organization. Then we give people a quota. Two problems with that. The first problem is when you hand somebody a number and tell them this is what you need, it's almost a natural reaction for the salesperson to feel like the number's too high. So there's this natural tendency to feel like, well, wait a minute, my number last year was a lot lower, or that's different than what I had before, or that doesn't make sense, or I have this different module of customers now. So that's the first challenge. The second thing is it's lower than the number they would have picked for themselves. And we've actually done this with clients over many years. When you ask salespeople how much money they want to make, they almost invariably pick a number that's higher than the number that they would earn at quota, and they are almost always willing to sign up for a higher target. So we're actually trying to hold them accountable for a number that's lower than the one they'd commit to. But here's what's really cool about doing these conversations in a way that is more focused on what the salesperson wants to accomplish. We can learn about what really drives them, about their underlying motivation. Just a quick example of that. I had a sales manager once who was talking with a sales rep, and she asked him what his income goal was, how much money he wanted to make. And he said some number, I don't remember what it was. And she said, well, why that? And it was interesting, he had a personal goal. He said, I want a new BMW. So here's what was really cool about it. As they were out on joint calls one day, she arranged for a test drive at a BMW dealership with somebody she knew over there. And she demonstrated her commitment to helping him achieve his goals. And his goal was higher than what he would have made at quota anyway. So there's a great opportunity here for us to do a more effective job at goal setting and getting people committed. And this is really essential. If you think about things that you've done with personal trainers in particular, you don't meet with your personal trainer and sit down and they look at you and say, my goal for you is to be able to run a 6-minute mile. Or I want you to be able to bench press 200 pounds 10 times. They start by asking you what you want to accomplish. And that's the same approach that we want to apply here. And once we do that, we need to have some kind of a success plan in place where we can figure out what they have to do daily, weekly, monthly, in terms of things like new opportunities, new proposals, closing ratio, proposal ratio, in order to achieve those objectives. So there's a great opportunity here to transform quota conversations into planning conversations where we actually gain the leverage necessary to coach, right? The next thing we're going to talk about is uncovering gaps. And here we want to learn about performance gaps, but also behavior gaps. And the thing is, in order to uncover behavior gaps that are meaningful, we have to agree on a model for behavior. So if any of you have taken a lesson, here's what doesn't happen. You don't go take your lesson and hit the ball and the coach says, yeah, you're really terrible. You need to get better at that. They figure out why. If you're playing golf and you're slicing everything, they figure out what's happening in the course of your swing. And there is a model for what an ideal swing looks like. In fact, it's a pretty famous example of a professional golfer switching coaches. Tiger Woods did this some time back, switched coaches because he felt that one coach's version or view of what an ideal swing would look like for Tiger Woods was different than Tiger's view. So the challenge we've got in sales is oftentimes there is no common understanding of what the right qualifying call looks like or what the right approach is to presenting. I'm excited, enthused, and encouraged to see so many of you have sales methodology initiatives. If you don't agree on what good selling behavior looks like, it's really difficult to coach, because what happens is managers and sellers are constantly debating, and managers are trying to figure out what's ideal for one seller versus what's ideal for another. So it's important that there be a common model against which the behavior is being evaluated. The other thing to keep in mind here is gaps are not inherently bad. We don't want people feeling as though if they're not hitting it, that they're failing. So it's important to have an attitude here as a coach that a personal trainer would take, that they're there to help you and encourage and inspire you. The next thing, and arguably the hardest thing, is analyzing the root cause. So once we understand a gap in performance, a gap in behavior, we need to understand, is this a skill or knowledge gap? Or is this a commitment or capacity gap? And by the way, you cannot identify that it's a capacity gap if you see that somebody isn't executing a particular behavior until you've tried to shrink any skill or knowledge gap. And you know it's a commitment gap if they simply won't do the assignment that would shrink the skill or knowledge gap. You know it's a capacity gap if you give them an assignment that would shrink the gap, they do it and they don't get better over time. So it's important for us to have the expertise to do that. And we're going to talk about how we help build that in a minute. But once we do that, once we've identified the underlying skill gap, so let's say somebody isn't qualifying effectively, and one of the key things they're missing is financial criteria, and it's because they don't have the skill to have a meaningful conversation with their buyers about the buyer's financial criteria. Now what I need to do is I need to give them an assignment, a learning activity that will shrink that gap. And a quick question for all of you, and you can do this with raising your hand so everybody can see it. How many of you on the call right now are learning and development professionals? So you've got a background in learning and development. If you do, then you already are familiar with either this model, learn, practice, apply, evaluate, or something like it, right? And the thing about this is, the way we develop new skills isn't by sitting in an event and getting exposed to all of them. We learn it a skill at a time and increment on skills this way. And what happens if we engage in coaching this way, and I'm actually going to try to draw this on the screen, it's a gutsy move, as we go through these cycles of uncovering gaps, identifying the root cause, and then evaluating performance, what happens is it drives these LPAE cycles. And what we want to do is build a culture where this happens on a consistent basis. Not every day, maybe not even every week, but at least every 2 weeks, everybody's getting accustomed to getting better at something. And if we do that, we get into a regular cadence of embedding learning and development via effective coaching into the organization and any initiative, new product release, new tool, competitive change or strategy change. Any of those things can be implemented more effectively as a result. So that's what we really want to focus our attention on. So last step, and let me see if I can advance the slide here. Okay, so the last step is evaluating the performance. And this is Coach John Wooden. Coach John Wooden was a legendary UCLA NCAA basketball coach. And Coach Wooden's quote was, "A coach is someone who can give correction without causing resentment." When we think about the E in guide, we're evaluating our performance. Your personal trainer, your coaches, they're typically not just evaluating you when you get back and they check to see whether or not you completed an assignment, whether or not the assignment helped you get better at that instrument, helped flatten out your tennis stroke, helped improve the trajectory of the flight of your golf ball. They're checking to see whether or not their coaching was effective. And the thing we want to do with completed assignments is reward them over and over and over again so that people doing them get in the habit of completing them because they get the positive reinforcement of a coach who's enthusiastic that they're making progress. So next thing is, last item on the agenda before Q&A, and then we'll open it up, is how do sales enablement professionals actually help to build a coaching culture, actually help managers make this shift from providing feedback to providing meaningful coaching. And for those of you that are learning and development professionals, you'll recognize this one also. It's Bloom's Taxonomy. And I ask you to think about this. If you're implementing a new methodology or a new tool or some new approach, where relative to that skill, that execution, where do people have to be on the taxonomy in order for you to get business results? And the answer is they have to be able to apply it. So whatever you're implementing, whatever they're learning, they have to be able to actually apply it, execute it. The interesting thing is, when you think about where coaches need to be in order to help them, the sellers, get to application level understanding, they have to be at evaluating. So coaches have to be higher. And it's interesting because in many cases, they know it less. They don't sit in on the training. They don't use the tools. And so they're at a huge disadvantage at helping their sellers become more proficient with them. So what do we do to enable coaches? A couple of things we can do. So first off, help them in the goal setting conversations by giving them tools that help to actually create custom sales success plans for each person. Make certain that they're committed to the shared behavior models, to the enablement initiative. If they're not 100% committed, and if they're not clear on the roles they'll play in helping to drive adoption and proficiency, then you're going to have a huge challenge all the way through, right? So they've got to actually be bought into the behavior models. And then what we need to do is we need to give them help diagnosing the root cause. Because until they get really, really proficient and they're all the way at the evaluation stage, they need help. And by the way, there are resources for other coaching professionals. Like, I understand, and I'm not a PGA professional, clearly. I'm not even a good golfer, but understand that PGA actually has a library of assignments that PGA professionals can go, a resource center, if you will, that they can go to help leverage what they've learned about a golfer. Specific activities that they can assign that will help shrink particular gaps. We need to create that. So we need to help them diagnose the root cause of performance and behavior gaps. And then we need to provide them with an assignment library. And don't overcomplicate it. Doesn't necessarily have to be a sophisticated tool, even a spreadsheet that shows them, hey, if this is the gap, this is the skill, and this is the assignment you want to give them, would be helpful. And then we need to track, measure, and reward coaching. Almost all sales organizations, when they meet as a leadership team, review numbers. Almost none review the team and the development path that each of the players is on. And sports teams do that consistently. They do it every time they. So we've got a huge opportunity. We can drive dramatically better results, and we can make sure that all of our initiatives, not only the things that you see today that you want to go do in your organization, but the things you're already planning, are significantly more successful if we engage the managers and help them make this transformation from feedback or super sellers into coaches. And one thing I want to give you confidence in is, we think sometimes that managers don't want to coach or sellers don't want it. Our experience is overwhelmingly the opposite. Managers want to be great coaches. That's part of the reason that they took the promotion to manager, because in many cases they're making less money as sellers. They just need help getting there. And sellers want great coaches. Part of the reason they push back is they're getting lots of feedback and not a whole lot of coaching. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dee and we'll open it up for questions and answers. And by the way, as we're doing this, on your screen, the QR code that you see now is different than the QR code that you saw at the beginning. So if you scan this QR code, it's going to take you to a landing page where you can actually download a guide to sales coaching. And in that guide, at the back of that guide, there's actually a coaching readiness assessment. So if you're a sales enablement professional and you've got some initiatives, which all of you apparently do, or at least most of you, you can actually go through this real quick 10-question assessment to figure out how ready are you from a coaching perspective to help leverage that for your next enablement initiative. Okay, now Dee, turn it over to you.
Okay, first question. How can coaching effectiveness be measured?
That's a really great question. It's one of the most common ones. So I said a minute ago, we're not measuring it. And what we're measuring is sales results. We may be measuring it on an individual seller basis against quota, but we're not measuring whether coaches are engaging in sales and coaching conversations, and we're not measuring whether or not they're effective. So the first part is actually setting targets for the frequency with which coaches should do the things that I showed you on the slide, the activities, right? So how often should they be having activity or funnel reviews? How often should they be doing on joint calls and actually reporting on that? And if you're using CRM, there are a variety of ways that you can report on those as activities. But the other thing is coaching can still just be feedback if that's the case. So the artifact for an effective coaching conversation is an assignment. So it is a developmental assignment. So all you need to do to measure whether or not effective coaching is happening is create targets for development. So you'd say things like the target is going to be, and by the way, engage them in the conversation of setting the targets, but the conversation is going to be each person needs to get better at something on some cadence. Let's just make it monthly. So what you'll want to see is that a developmental assignment was given out and completed by each person on a monthly basis. And once again, that's something that you can track in CRM and a variety of other tools.
Okay, our next question is, how important is on-the-job coaching versus classroom coaching?
I would, if I were going to break them down, I would say it's like 90-10. The on-the-job coaching is the most important part, but that falls into a couple of different categories. There are going on joint sales calls, which is what a lot of people think is like game time coaching. And there's a pretty significant shift that needs to happen for a lot of managers because many managers are much more concerned with losing the deal than losing the rep. And so we need to get managers to actually do a better job of observing calls and do a little less of taking over calls, but we need to equip them also. So one of the reasons the debrief after a call isn't very productive is because we haven't given them a competency model that they can use to evaluate the rep's performance in a more objective fashion. And so that's on-the-job coaching that can be really, really effective as long as there's some objective way to evaluate the performance. And then, once again, there's a way to diagnose any gaps and then assignments that can be used to help shrink those gaps. So I would say that's much more important. Classroom things are really about building belief in change initiatives, setting some foundational understanding of what the program's going to look like, and much less about developing skill and knowledge.
So I think you may have just answered this question as part of the previous question, but Debbie asks, they have operations managers who've been given sales employees, but have never been in sales, the managers. Yeah. So what would you advise to start with to create a training program for this group to become great sales coaches?
Well, that's awesome. And believe it or not, not that uncommon. And I'll say not that bad. So first thing is you have to get a commonly shared and understood selling methodology. So how do we expect our people to engage with our customers? And what you want is you want the managers to take on responsibility for learning and becoming proficient with that so that they can model it. And in many cases, by the way, managers will want to model parts of this actually on joint calls. So notwithstanding what I said before, managers can take part in a joint call, but it should be to model a behavior where the rep really can develop and improve. And what happens in many cases, and this should be encouraging for Debbie, what happens in many cases is people who've never been in sales, they buy into those models more completely and more quickly, and they become more proficient more quickly than the sellers. And that's the sort of the first step. Then on top of that, you want to layer a coaching model like guide for them so that they understand how to leverage their knowledge to help elevate the skill and knowledge of the salespeople.
Okay. And I think we have time for just one more. And this one's kind of interesting. It's, is there a framework we can use if we notice that our coaching plan isn't working?
Yes. Is there a framework? Well, I'll tell you, I don't know so much that it's a framework, because if you've implemented this, effectively to begin with, then you had a framework, right? But the framework isn't working. That's a good time when you need a partner who is really aligned with your success to help you by having difficult conversations about why it's not working. And I'll tell you that there are a number of reasons why it might not, and they're not that uncommon, that unfamiliar to you, because they're similar to what you see in other enablement initiatives. You don't have buy-in from leadership. You didn't get the coaches committed in the first place. They don't believe it. There's some inherent flaw in the models that needs to be exposed and addressed. But I would say if you've already implemented it in a structured way, then it's probably good to bring in some outside party that you trust to give you objective feedback about it and do an assessment of why it isn't working and help you with that.
So I guess what you're saying is even coaches need coaches.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's well put. It's a great way to finish. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, like I said, that's about all the time we have for this, but is there anything you'd like to leave us with today?
No, I would just encourage everybody. It's not insurmountable. It's hard work, but it's not that overwhelming once you get your mind focused on being really intentional about how you do it and not overcomplicating it. But there's lots to be gained by implementing coaching programs and using that to help leverage and drive your sales enablement initiatives. Thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thanks for getting us off to a great start.